much, Gary. Afternoon, everyone. I'm George Thomas. I'm a land agent for Sentry Limited, specialising in farm agreements. Do a lot of utilities work at the moment, estate management, and even more so the environment. I believe most of you are expecting my colleague Oscar Smith to be standing here today. However, he has contracted the virus. I work in-house for Sentry for all our businesses, as well as advising our external clients. So the advisory arm to Sentry is called Sentry Business Solutions, which I run with Alec. There's now 8 of us on the team, and it's evolving rather quickly with the amount of policies and everything that's phasing in, and our clients wanting to know more and more about what's going on. Land and Family Business, as Gary said, have kindly invited me to discuss where we find ourselves with government policy and the new schemes as they come through. And as Gary has suggested with his chart, it is a bit of a minefield out there to work around at the moment. So just going through what I will be discussing. So policy, where we are at the moment and what's on the way. Natural capital, what is natural capital and how can we benefit from it? The land-based opportunities, again, stemming from natural capital and the future of elms as we know it at the moment. So just as a very quick recap, basic payment scheme, it's been around for a long time now. We all know that it's phasing out, sadly. But just to highlight and reiterate, we are halfway through the agricultural transition now under the Act. And this is where it starts to become a little bit daunting with these figures. So by 2024, all claimants should be budgeting a 50% decrease in their BPS payment. The last payment will be 2027. So is this now a good time to make new business decisions? I think it probably is. As a guide, where's this BPS money going? 10% of the money is moved through to the productivity support schemes. 90% is being moved into environmental schemes, so we can see how heavily focused and heavily weighted that is. Again, sustainable farming incentive, local nature recovery, landscape recovery, all part of elms. That's where all this money is going. So new business decisions, what could these be? Could it be a time for generational change? Could it be a time for a change in business structure? Could it be a time for new approaches and looking at new farming methods? These are all things that we need to start considering. At the end of the day, every farm business is different. No business is the same. Some have more opportunity to diversify and achieve additional income than others. However, there is one thing that we are all going through, and that is you're losing your BPS pay. Just to very briefly touch on HLS and countryside stewardship, which superseded it. Very briefly, the stewardship schemes, I believe, have been running since 2016. Very useful way to tap into some additional income on marginal parts of the farm. These are fixed payments, although DEFRA have just increased the payments, which is quite nice of them. For the 2022 year, under these schemes, it's 5 years of fixed payment, fixed income. There's no risk, no volatility. It's something that everyone should be looking into. I haven't got time to talk about it today, but if you want to know any more about countryside stewardship, or if you've got an issue with HLS, if you've been offered an extension, unsure what to do, please come and talk to me after this talk. So natural capital, it's essentially the make-up of the land. It's how your farm is made. As I've put there, arable, grassland, woodland, streams, ponds, it's the soil, the air, hedgerows, just about everything. And all of these different areas make up public goods. So all of this environmental policy that's coming forwards is going to be focusing around these areas. The best example I could find of natural capital currently is the English Woodland Creation Offer, which is relatively new to us. And there's an example here of how the scheme allows you to stack options. So not only do you receive an £8,500 hectare basic lump sum for tree planting and establishment, there are these additional payments that can also be factored in. So payments for public access, again, public good. Payments for being close to settlements. Payments for riparian buffers. Another payment for reducing flood risk, improving water quality. These are all payments that we can stack onto that £8,500 a hectare. Nature recovery, essentially habitat enhancement, but you can see how the Elm scheme is phasing in even to this woodland creation offer. It's almost being brought forwards. On top of that, Woodland Carbon Code, fully established scheme. It's been running for several years. This is a government-run scheme. It's an auction. And just to give you an idea on values for woodland carbon, last year in the auction, the government was buying credits at between 21 and £24 per tonne of CO2. And the carbon prices fluctuate anywhere from £6 to 25 per tonne of CO2. And these will be payments ongoing for the scheme length.
Can you add that to BNG, Biodiversity Net Gain?
I'm going to come on to that.
You're going to come on to that, okay, because that's the exciting bit, I think.
That's where it gets exciting.
Yeah, okay.
I was going to set the scene first.
Okay, sorry, okay, go.
So yeah, this is what we call stacking, and that will lead on to additionality with the option for potentially biodiversity net gain opportunities. I should also say with this grant, they've increased the maintenance payment from £200 to £300 a hectare, and that's paid for 10 years. So biodiversity net gain, it's been spoken about for a long time now, but it's amazing how quickly it's suddenly come round. And we're only a year away from everything becoming more mandatory, although it might take a little bit longer for the local planning authorities to adopt their sort of version of it, I guess. So as what we know at the moment is there's going to be a 10% minimum uplift in habitat value for developers to find. If they cannot onset on a development site, they're going to have to outsource, find an offsetting site. This provides opportunities to landowners and farmers for additional income. As far as I'm aware, the further the development, the developer has to go to look for an offsetting site. So if he, say, crosses the local planning authority area, you could be looking at a 15% uplift requirement, or even a 30% in some cases. So all of these additional payments are, on the wrong track. As I say, these opportunities are starting to appear now. The metric is calculated through a Natural England calculator called 3.0. This generates a number of credits depending on your habitat, effectively, whether it's woodland, grassland, whatever you're dealing with.
So there's two ways to do it, as I understand. Is you can either lease or land out for 30 years, which is Environment Bank, I think, one example, or you can actually sell credits per hectare or per acre.
Yeah, so what exactly right? So what is in discussion at the moment is the chance to actually identify a site for biodiversity offsetting, which could be attractive for developers. You would run your calculation, you'll run your baseline, work out how many credits are within that area, say 4 or 5 credits per hectare. That's where the negotiator comes in. What is a willing price for a deal? You know, there's not many of these deals out there at the moment. Is it £10,000 an acre, 15, 20,000? That's yet to come, and as this becomes mandatory, there's going to be more cases. You know, it's all going to hopefully become a bit more clear. But there are a lot of considerations to make, as I've said there. There's the land asset value to take into consideration to start off with. You know, you're starting off with arable land, £12,000 an acre. Is it then going into grassland at less of a value, or woodland? The length of the term, it's a 30-year term. So it's a long time. A lot can happen in 30 years. Who knows? We might be on hovercrafts. You just can't, you know, even in 20 years, you don't know what's going to happen. So there's a lot of unknown.
So you mentioned, George, that there's, you mentioned that there's £10,000, £20,000 some of the figures we've seen are £10,000 to £20,000 a unit.
So, yeah, that would be per credit, per unit.
Credit.
You might have 4 or 5 credits per acre.
Yeah, per acre, absolutely.
Which I'd say would be a good score. So yeah, you're looking up to £100,000 per acre.
You're looking at £100,000 per acre up front.
Yeah,
that's
correct. Yeah,
those are the numbers that we've seen around.
We're hearing,
and been in the press as well. I've been in the Farmers Weekly.
Absolutely. You've obviously got an obligation to manage that area. Unless you decide you want someone else to. But again, there's additional, hearing of additional payments for the management of those sites on top of that payment. And you might want to be a bit careful. Gary might be able to advise better than me on the tax issues around this. But you might want to be a bit careful if you have a couple of £100,000 come in one lump sum. Just remember, you've got 30 years to maintain that site.
So if you squander that 100,000 up front doing other things with it, you've got you've got land with a negative value, basically, a liability. I don't know if we got any comments on that. Julie, did you want to add to?
Just your loaded squander there.
Yeah, just a bit of excitement in agriculture. 100,000 per acre, you would squander a bit, possibly.
Yeah, maybe your bias, Gary.
Yeah.
But it depends what you do with that 200,000, doesn't it? Whether you're going to invest it for the next.
Absolutely, yes, sure. Yeah, and as George said, we are looking at structures, structures, and we don't know how it's going to be taxed. If it's personal, it could be up to 45% tax, which is, a big leakage for an upfront payment for a 30-year deal. Yeah, so it's all new territory, but it's quite exciting. It's challenging for us, but quite exciting. David, did you want to? Yeah. So have we got a microphone? Will.
Yeah, just to mention that the payment terms can be agreed between the landowner and the developer.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't have to be an upfront lump sum payment. They can be staged.
Yeah, of course.
And DEFRA is not setting any rules around that.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Yeah.
It's a private negotiated agreement.
Of course, exactly. And yes, and so the example I mentioned earlier on, the Environment Bank will lease land from you for, in relative terms, negligible value. But gives you a large management fee for 30 years per acre to do. So there's all sorts of different structures, and we've been, our tax team here have been looking at it and trying to work out what's the best way. And when there's no definitive way at the moment, where we do the best, we can put together structures for the least risk. I think that's right, Sam, isn't it? That's what we do.
Yes, I think that is. I think we've looked at a few happening.
Thank you. Yes, we've seen a few of these schemes now, and obviously the Environmental Bank, there's a lease, so actually from a tax point of view that's part income, part capital, and then the ongoing yearly management charges will be income. Others we've looked at, I think there's some question mark over whether it's income or capital. I think where upfront payments are made, and there's sort of, we're talking quite substantial payments, where they are income and it's 30-year sort of term, then we do feel, I think, as sort of a lot of people do, that should be written down over the 30 years and not taxed as an upfront payment. But there's a lot of other things to consider, obviously the capital gains tax issues and inheritance tax issues, so it has quite a knock-on effect on sort of, especially personal taxes, where you've got partnerships in a corporate structure. It's very much sort of taxed at the one rate, but in a personal situation and family partnerships, then it really is quite important to sort of give consideration to some of the longer term effects as well, and planning within the family.
Thanks, Sam. Back to you, George, please. Sorry to intervene.
Okay. So carbon, I mean, it's a presentation in itself, really, like most of these topics, but yeah, just briefly. What I can really say on carbon is I think everyone should just be aware of it and where you fall. There's plenty of carbon calculators online at the moment. We've been using the Cool Farms tool over some of the others. It's quite a straightforward process. Just get an understanding of your position Are you negative, neutral, or positive? And actually, there is a lot of evidence, even if because what will happen is it will generate a load of numbers and you probably won't know what to do with that. So, but actually, during that process, it's amazing how, as I've said there's evidence to show how carbon efficiency is business efficiency. You might look at an area and just think, how can I reduce costs there? And when you're thinking about supply and inputs coming in, even if you just reduce the amount of times inputs were coming onto the farm and just try and be more efficient, that might actually lead to a cost saving for you. So the question to the room really, what makes everyone nervous about selling carbon? Because there seems to be a lot of nervousness around doing that, and it'd be good to know what people's thoughts are, because there's a lot of schemes that are out there and there's not many people that are willing to jump into any of them. A lot of these schemes will actually pay you based almost on an assumption, based on a methodology payment. So the fact that you are farming in a particular way, you will receive a payment. There's no science behind it. It's not someone going out testing for carbon. It's not scientific. There's obviously some pros and cons to that, but it'd be good to hear from the room if people had any thoughts whether to sell carbon or not, because it's in the Farmers Weekly every week. So,
anybody
good to know.
Want to comment at this stage, or we move on? Ian Piggott. Sorry to land you in it, Ian. I can see you're eager to say something.
Sorry, yeah, Richard Beach now.
Oh, Richard, sorry, I've got Richard to say. Let you off, Ian. Yeah, sorry, Richard, you go.
I planted 3 hectares of woodland nearly 20 years ago, and I sold the carbon under a scheme that lovely David Anker told me about. It was very well monitored for about 5 years, and for the last 15 years I've heard absolutely nothing. And my thoughts are that whoever bought the carbon, for whatever reason, they've probably sold it on by now, but I have no idea what that means for that particular woodland, because in theory I've sold my carbon. Big question mark. Secondly, I planted 15 acres of woodland 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and then I find that the tree rate per hectare that Till Hill and I worked out no longer allows me to sell the carbon. It seems to be completely bonkers that if you plant at 1,600 a hectare, you're of no use to carbon selling, but if you plant at, 2,000 a hectare, which is far too tight for woodland, you can sell the carbon, but then you have to go and thin it all out in 10 years' time anyway. So it just seems it's an ill thought out at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Ian, you'll come back. Do you want to say anything now, or are you okay? Sorry, I picked on you earlier on.
I have gone onto a carbon platform, and the bit that I'm interested in, George, from you is that with that at the moment, you can claim, so I can claim credits against the arable acreage that we're no-tilling regen, but unless we're harvesting the margins, they're not eligible for credits. So if we're going to try and stack a biodiversity net gain on top of it, we're not going to necessarily be able to claim the carbon, which seems a bit confusing. But just in terms of trading, your question, Gary, about trading the carbon, I personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable. I'm banking the carbon, but I wouldn't feel comfortable selling it at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where most of the world's got to.
Yeah.
Initially, we thought going to make millions out of selling carbon, and think, oh, hold on, we might need it. Yeah. And I think that's very simplistic. We need to be moving on because we've got a lot to go through in the next hour or so. Yeah. Thanks, George.
So, ELMS, the environmental land management schemes, just to quickly go over, SFI is already upon us. The pilots are already running. Several of our Sentry farms are within SFI schemes, and some of our clients have gone into the pilot. DEFRA still haven't announced when the applications are going to be live this year. either going to be the end of spring or summer, but for whatever reason, they're still having difficulty, even at this late stage, telling us a date, which isn't helpful. Local nature recovery, this will effectively supersede countryside stewardship. As I spoke about earlier, the English woodland creation offer, that's almost part of that scheme. That's how those schemes are sort of going to look. Landscape recovery, this is large scale stuff. This is collaborating with other landowners possibly, all getting together to try and create this and drive this large scale habitat change, which might not be beneficial for everyone, but there's still detail to come through on that. So the big buzzword really, as Gary was talking about earlier, is this additionality. And we've got Biodiversity Net Gain to think about. That's coming through now. Carbon, that's already here. There's still a lot of unknowns really. So just as an example, talking about additionality, could we see ourselves in a situation where we've got an area of land which has got the woodland creation offer over it, with a biodiversity net gain agreement and a carbon scheme, and possibly a nutrient neutrality scheme? It's possible. DEFRA and private investors at the end of the day are not going to pay for the same thing twice, and I think that's the key message. So whatever you're doing, if you can justify that there are absolutely clear different outcomes from where you're being paid for what you're doing, it's possible. I think the best example I could think of was under countryside stewardship. Winter bird food option AB9. DEFRA are paying you to provide a food source for farmland birds over the winter period, what they call the hunger gap. But as a result of that option and management, there is potential for improvements to water quality and maybe even reduction in soil runoff. They are two completely different things. DEFRA are paying you to provide seed value for birds. However, you're improving the water quality. So could you talk to your local water catchment officer? Is there additional funding opportunities there? I would suggest there is. However, if you look at the SFI scheme, and we'll be talking about, if we're talking about carbon, for the soil standard, there is a mention of carbon in there. So part of that payment is allocated to locking in carbon, or the assumption that you're locking in carbon. So if you then go and try and get a carbon scheme over an SFI land area, you might be in trouble there. That could be perceived as double funding.
Okay.